Michelle Kamp, but let's say Mimi Kamp, because that's how everybody knows me and that's how I sign everything. Are an incredible, gentle modality that can help all people, but I have a particular perspective. I like research a lot, and every single day I'm doing research to see how these particular essences affect people. When I give essences to a client, I feel confident that it's going to have some simple and beneficial effect. But if I give an essence to a medicine person, which I would say most of my students fit into that category, anything can happen. It can be a teacher for them, it can show them anything, it can take them anywhere, it can put them through some hard times. It can make them face something that they weren't facing. It puts them in process to come to know themselves much more deeply. Most of all those kits that you saw, I made those for practitioners because I don't want to necessarily sell people stuff. And practitioners know how to use them with their clients. Have this particular emphasis on doing ongoing research with students.
What makes the students different than other clients?
First of all, they're plant people. They know plants. They have a really strong attraction, and most of them have been studying some aspects of plants. They are healers themselves. So that they also have a lot of experience with self-examination. And of course, you will have a lot of clients who also fit into this category. So that when they take something, they have a lot of sensitivity that they've somehow developed, and they're creating a relationship between themselves and a plant or many plants, which most people haven't necessarily done. Oils are material dose. I mean, it's physical. It's very physical, and not only is it physical, the physical expression of the plant, the chemical expression of the plant, but it's highly, highly concentrated by distillation. So you have something that's very intense physically, and if you take it internally, you may only take 1 or 2 drops. What an essence is, it has no chemistry in it. It's very much akin to a homeopathic remedy. It is essentially the vibration of a plant. That's what it is, and so it tastes like water, unless and sometimes I preserve it with a little bit of alcohol. But that particular vibration triggers vibrations in the human body, so there's all kinds of responses happening on emotional levels, on physical levels as well, but they tend to be used more as psychological medicines. Well, I learned that stuff when I was in my 20s, probably because I was always interested in homeopathy. Homeopathy started back when all the physicians were herbalists. They worked with plant medicines. They had a lot of people who they were dealing with, they were life and death cases, and they had to find things that worked. They also used some very heavy chemicals like mercury. Mercury was the cure for syphilis, but then people would later die from mercury poisoning or have symptoms from mercury poisoning. So somewhere before the turn of the last century, there were various physicians who started experimenting. How little mercury can I give someone and get a positive healing without side effects? So they gave less and less and less and less. They kept diluting it and diluting it, and they discovered that they got a really good healing of the syphilis if there was no mercury anymore. That if it were taken to a lab and tested, they would say, this is water. So they were getting very profound. Homeopathy stimulates very profound responses in the body. And what it's doing essentially is it's trying to remind the body of its own healing capacity. Like we've got that. but somehow we have blocked at times. At times we block that healing capacity, which is innate. And that's how I see flower essences as well as homeopathy. With homeopathy, I'm pretty careful about how I use them, and especially in high potencies, because you can change somebody. You can maybe change them permanently. You want to make sure you have the right remedy. With the flower essence, I can say that the Bach people, who were the first people to present flower essences, would say something like, if you give a person a flower essence and it's not appropriate, nothing will happen. They won't have a response. It will go right through their body and it won't find a matching pattern. So if it does find a matching pattern, it goes to work. One thing I want to say about essential oils, I think they're fabulous medicines, and really working into the brain with the olfactory functions and everything is important. But for me, it's extremely important to look at sustainability with medicine. Every individual should have some responsibility for what they take in. Every person who takes an essential oil knows this is well supported. A lot of it is grown in gardens, and that's fine. But sometimes people can take things from the wild, and do we know that they are not taking too much? When you think about folk medicine, people used what was close to them and what they could access to heal themselves. And now medicine is a big business. So we're taking medicines from China, and we're taking things from here and there, which I don't totally oppose, but I think it's really nice that an essence is something that anybody can experience without paying much of anything. Is there a plant that really zings you when you go for a walk? Let's say you're feeling really upset about something. You take a walk. Almost always you get better. And it's not just the walking, but I have this idea, like you sit down underneath a tree. You sit there for a while and things move inside of you. I think that the tree you sat under wasn't an accident, and it's some kind of innate instinct that takes you to a spot that has an energy that works with what you are dealing with. Something like that.
So, Mimi, where are we today?
Oh, we're in the Mule Mountains.
And we are talking to you about flower essences.
Yes.
And you have worked with flower essences how long?
Over 40 years. I grew up in the woods in Pennsylvania. And what I noticed at a very, very young age, without having these words or this thought process exactly happening, was when you go in the woods, everything gets healed. That there's something a little off in some of the social culture around me, or that my family has some problems that they're not voicing or something like this. But when I go in the woods, everything is real. And it makes a lot of sense. So that's how I started out. And so I had a lot of relationship with plants. I started studying ferns and different things when I was in high school. Then what happened to me is that I was very, very ill in my 20s. When I went to practitioners, they said, oh, what happened to your liver? Did you have hepatitis? And it wasn't that. But in utero, I had been poisoned, and the doctor had told my mom I would die. I got okay. I was okay through childhood. But in my 20s, I was very ill. My family thought I was going to die. So I had to find healing. And I studied acupuncture, I studied polarity therapy, but it was very natural for me to gravitate towards plants. The first thing I remember was I was living in Portland, and I had a job as a waitress or something 1 or 2 days a week, and I had to walk through an empty lot to get there. And so I got me a little flora of Washington State, or Oregon and Washington, at some kind of library sale, and I started looking up all those little plants that were grown in this piece of land that had been bulldozed and destroyed. And it wasn't the normal lush natural scene. And I discovered when I started doing research that almost every single plant there was medicine. That they were trying to heal the earth, but they're also medicines for people. And we just tried to find everything we could find as far as what works, that's accessible and simple and non-toxic. We were in this clinic, and so the doctors sent a lot of people to us for certain kinds of diseases or problems, because they knew even then that the herbs could handle them better than they could. So we give each person a little card with our address on the back, saying, "Did this work? Didn't it? You know, what happened? How the dosage, you know, any kinds of questions we could find." And later on, the person I was working with there made a book called Healing Yourself.
Heal yourself.
Healing yourself.
Healing Yourself.
By
And
Joy
it
Garth.
gave people in the old hippie days tools for handling things in a simple way. I was getting up every single morning at 6 o'clock and going on the woods. I would be gone until afternoon, and I was studying. But there were two aspects. I was studying the botany and the science and what herbal information I could scrape together, because back then, all the stuff, all the information from the eclectics, all the rich mass of herbal information that we have now was not visible. All the stuff from before was out of print. Now it's all in print, you know. So we had Back to Eden, which isn't that good an herbal book. But we had, you know, and the other thing is, I'm talking more than I should, but you can cut it out.
No,
So
it's perfect.
the other thing is, because I felt really ill, I started looking for people who were healing. And what I found was a handful of women who had been told by the doctors, there is no hope. And they said, no way. And each of them found something different. And the one person that I apprenticed myself to and spent a lot of time with did raw foods. She said, I'll eat anything, but it's got to be raw. And then she would take me and we would walk, and by then I knew everything that was edible. And we would just pick everything that was green that was edible and throw it in a blender, and we'd have these green drinks every day. And I watched people come in her front door with hopeless faces, fear, a lot of fear. You know, mostly cancer patients are really heavy-duty, toxic or skin diseases or something like that. And a few months later, they'd walk out with this radiance. And one of the things that some of these people up there were doing is they were importing chaparral, Laurea tridentata, from down here up there, and they were getting in tablets. So I thought, I gotta go look at this plant. I need to make personal connections, friendships, some kind of intimate connection with a plant and its energy before I feel that good about, before I feel complete in, you know, using it. So I came down here and landed in Phoenix. Well, why do I need to buy something that comes from England when we have tons of flowers here? I just started walking out beyond my place in the beginning of the rainy season, and I started making essences. There were a lot of rules that had come down, and one of them was you can only make an essence on the morning of a cloudless day. What if the peak of the blooming is not in the morning? You know, like a yucca, they look like bells. You know how they look like bells? Well, one day I went out at night and shone a flashlight up in the yucca, and all those bells were like this, because they were communing with the stars in the sky, and they were about a different kind of energy. It wasn't solar, it was about inner. One time I was gathering the fairy duster, so I was picking the flowers. It was the morning of a cloudless day, and there was not a cloud in the sky and not a breeze. And as soon as the flower hit the surface of the water, I picked it and put it on the, you know how to make an essence, put it on the surface of the bowl of water. the wind started blowing. And pretty soon I looked up and clouds were coming, and there's a lot of turbulence and real intensity happening in the sky. And I thought, oh, I guess it's no good. So I went back the next day. The same thing happened. And then I said, bad weather pattern. So I waited until, and somewhere in the fall, like months later, when there was another period where there was a lot of rain. And this fairy duster is a very responsive plant. Like some desert things, just like, this is my time for 2 weeks or for 1 week. I'm blooming out. You're not going to see me again until next year. But the fairy duster will bloom like a week or two after rains at any time of year almost. Yeah. So I did it again, and you know what happened. And I heard this voice in my head that said, don't you get it? We're working with you. We're showing you something. This plant has to do, like you looked at it and all the little things were quivering with in the breeze. And it has a lot to do with brain function and neurotransmitters and that kind of emotional difficulty in maintaining stability, feeling really excited, overexcited maybe, and really creative, building castles in the air and then crashing. It's a bipolar. It works a lot for bipolar. But the point of that particular story was that it's not me doing a scientific thing. Like homeopathy is kind of scientific because they take the chemistry and they dilute it a lot. But this is something else. It's like the spirit of the plant, or whatever you want to call it, is actually participating with you in making a medicine. And when you do the essences, you ask, will you come in, will you put your energy into the water so that I may take this to somebody who needs this energy, this healing. I can feel it sitting here, but this person is confined to the house or whatever, and I want to be able to take it. And you listen, and they almost always say yes, but the idea is that you recognize that it's not you, you know. Be very calming and at the same time stimulating. And they're very calming to the nervous system and to mental overplay. You know, that torturesome kind of thing that people need to let go of, so that the other parts of themselves, the intuition and the different pieces of themselves get a better time to play. But then there are also so many of these, like the Ocotillo, for instance. It calms down this agitation, reactivity, defensiveness, stuff like that. But it's a fire plant, and this is a fire plant. So it has fire, and it will stimulate when there is deficiency. Like I'll use a little bit of Ocotillo in a reproductive formula because it stimulates circulation here and in the whole body, that kind of thing. But the way it stimulates is not like a drug. It's gentle and balanced. It's interesting to look at the difference between herbs and essences, because I can make essences with things that are poisonous. And things that are not considered medicines. And looking at how many things here, because we're sort of still a frontier here, even though it's a frontier that's about to be destroyed, you know. But Native peoples used everything here, it seems like. You start looking further and further and further, and most plants have some influence on the physiology of the body to shift it a little bit one way or the other, as long as you know how to avoid the toxic ones.
Is there any flower essence that would work for hypothyroid?
Hypothyroid. Ashwagandha helps hypothyroid. What is it that I use most? I'm not thinking about flower essences right now. I have to get back to you on that. The thing about hypothyroid is that, like, Michael, who I was talking about, he was a pretty nuts and bolts kind of guy, very profound. He was a genius, but he didn't like to talk about New Age stuff and emotional stuff and all that. But he said that hypothyroid is an emotional problem. That's how it starts. The thyroid shuts down. Something going on with the pituitary and everything. And he had that take on that. So I think that's interesting. Yeah. And so things that now, if I'm thinking about what I would use for thyroid, it also brings me to something that I wanted to say about essences, which is that the first way that I started to work with them was to look at what, like most people who have trauma or imbalance or big difficulties, it often stems to sometime in early childhood or some trauma somewhere in life. And the pattern of mother, father, family stuff is really important for forming a human being's ability to take on the world. So if a person has a disturbed mother background in any way, like mom was there and she did everything, but she was emotionally unavailable, she was preoccupied, or anything that was imperfect, a person has the ability with the essences to recreate that internal model for themselves. That's how I felt. And I always felt that essences were really good for therapy, and that it can be a free therapy, because if you wander out there and one plant grabs you, it means you've got something going with that plant, and honor it. Pick it, get a vase of stuff, make a tea, sit with it, visit it. Something is happening. And this is the kind of thing that our culture doesn't recognize. Something's happening, so honor it. And maybe in a month or so, there's often moon cycles with how the effects kick in. You might stop being so excited by that plant. So it was helping you deal with some aspect, okay? Sometimes you never get tired of a plant. It's like a life plant, something like that. But I find that the cacti are incredible heart remedies. They almost all actually physically contain cardiac glycosides, which is interesting. But if you play with them, if you sit with them, if you hang out with them, or take the essences, there's a warmth, a belonging, and some of them are very, like the beautiful little hedgehog cactuses, it's very much a mother thing, like somebody who got that when they were early on. When they get older, they feel a lot of confidence, and they can play, and they feel great socially. So when you have somebody with the opposite pattern, they're kind of nervous and a little bit held back from people, and sometimes they have eating disorders and different things going on like that. I give them that, and sometimes other cacti or other plants, but that hedgehog particularly, it gives that sense of incredible security and radiance. And an underlying thing that comes up with most things, most of the plants that I use, is about separation, healing separation. Separation from yourself. Separation from people. Separation from something that makes sense. Separation from passion, something like that. So that's just an example of how,